Joining us now, Brad Pierce, the Director of Cybersecurity Operations for Horne Cyber. Good morning, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Gerard. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So many may not be aware that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And gosh, you'd have to be living in a cave if you haven't been seeing the almost daily reports, it seems, of breaches and incidents that are affecting businesses and individuals, and with respect to threats and penetration of networks and systems and devices and software. I mean, just the gambit, honestly, which is why it has gotten so complex. What are you seeing out there? I just don't feel like that customers or individuals, companies or individuals, are really ready and fully protected.
Yeah, it's a great question, Gerard. I think that, really one of the top things that we're seeing a lot of right now is in the realm of social engineering. So, the concept of spear phishing individuals inside of organizations, sending emails, coercing them to give up data that's sensitive, and in some cases, what we're seeing a lot of is what we call a permutated domain, and so a bad guy can go out and buy a domain and change one letter and component of that domain name and then start a campaign where they're reaching out to individuals inside of an organization with an email address and domain that's very similar to something that they're used to seeing. One of the things we've recently discovered is that a lot of these scams that are occurring, we'll see where an accounts payable department in an organization gets targeted. In one of the most recent instances, one of the contractors for this accounts payable company was breached, and it was a classic business email compromise. They set up all the rules on the back end, kept everything under the view of the legitimate user's mailbox, and started a conversation, learned all the dialogue, learned the business process, and then started subtly changing the business process, changing addresses and ACH information on invoices, and the money was being actually sent off to a group of people that were what we call money mules that were under a whole different social engineering scam, a romance scam. So, you name it there. I mean, these guys are being very creative. I was actually just kind of catching up on the most recent breach of the Twitch streaming platform. And while they've said that there's no passwords leaked, that they did also specify that this was part one of the leak. So I can't help but think that some password hashes or passwords may hit the market here soon. And really, every time that word list, I just call it a word list refresh. It just puts information in the bad guy's hands, specifically related to password reuse is something that we commonly see. So an individual may work at a company. Their network password is the same network password they use for LinkedIn, for their Google Mail, for Twitch. And so when those things hit the black market and start making their way into dictionary lists and things like that attackers use to get inside organizations, I mean, it's just a domino effect that a lot of times it's never traceable back to that breach, right? It's just, you don't know how it got out there.
Yeah. And so we're starting to see, Brad, more organizations. I think Google even recently required two-factor authentication, 2FA, and that is certainly one technique to try to avoid the simple breach that a hacker can employ by just using a password, which they could either guess or through the leakage, through other penetrations and breaches that, as you said, these things just end up on the market. Often they end up in the hands of the syndicate overseas, a lot of times from the Ukraine, and there's just a well-orchestrated kind of underworld that does all this for money. Is the bottom line.
Exactly.
It's all about It's all about getting money. So two-factor authentication is something I assume that you would recommend even to an individual user.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's certainly at this point it's a mandatory layer in the security stack of an organization
Yeah,
and someone's personal dealings, right? So, if you're using, I mean, I think most modern banking platforms now require some sort of multi-factor authentication, um, and so I personally use it for everything that I interact with online in personal dealings, and of course, my organization has that implemented as well. So it's a mandatory layer in the stack at this point for everyone, I think.
Brad, are you seeing that this rise in popularity of phishing in particular is probably the main way that malware invades, and certainly not just malware but ransomware, which is kind of a form of malware? It just seems like a lot of that is occurring because unsuspecting users think they're doing the right thing in responding and complying to these emails, which are nothing but phishing scams.
Absolutely. I mean, it is certainly. I mean, the human factor is one of the biggest factors in cybersecurity at this point. I think that there's a fair mix of organizations that may be behind pace on patching to vulnerabilities that have exploits in the wild. I mean, we do in fact see misconfigurations and vulnerabilities that organizations lag on patching. And so that certainly
Big time.
puts them at risk, for sure. But yeah, I mean, the human factor in this game is one of the biggest plays. It certainly uh, aids and assists in the propagation of malware, ransomware, and just in general social engineering scams at business and personal levels.
Yeah, I mean, so speaking of patching, the one that comes to mind is the giant Equifax breach, which probably leaked more Social Security numbers maybe than any other breach in history, which are then used to file fraudulent tax returns and for unemployment benefits. You know the deal, which cost hundreds of billions of dollars, honestly, when
Absolutely.
that occurs. And Cisco, as I recall, they had a Cisco infrastructure, warned Equifax and said, you know what, you're behind. We know we have a flaw in some of our underlying code, but if you don't patch, you're at risk. And they ignored it, didn't take action.
Yeah, and one of the things that I fortunately have the opportunity to speak with a lot of C level executives that may not be as technical, but are really interested in just understanding more about what they should be doing. And one of my biggest words of advice is to, take the time to learn your IT department, what they've got going on, and really asking the question, are we providing them enough resources to successfully do their job
Yeah,
and protect our
good point.
organization? I mean, it's just that, the budget for cyber, and we're starting to see that expand for organizations, and it has taken some time. Um, but it's just going to have to be one of those things that are figured in every year, and that organizations are going through routine penetration testing and vulnerability scanning. We at this point it's a never trust and verify environment. I mean,
Got to be a zero trust.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where we're
And
at.
and of course, what has tremendously complicated the whole discipline of protecting these IT assets is we got workloads in the cloud, we got workloads local, we got hybrid environments, we got remote workers, we got partners that access our systems. Your data and those who access your systems, it's not just like the old days when it was a data center where everything was kind of under lock and key and a few cables strung out to some terminals or PCs all under one roof. You could kind of secure that. You had one sort of egress ingress point. That's gotten so complicated that the idea and the practice of security is way more important than it ever was.
Yeah, I mean, our network infrastructures and since the pandemic, our workforce has become very detached and distributed,
Yeah.
which obviously adds a layer of complication. And um, I think that most organizations were partially prepared. I mean, video conferencing and voice over IP phones and those communication channels had already reached a point for most organizations to where they could be distributed fairly
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
Um, But I think that it really, when you disperse a workforce like it has been dispersed, I think that it's hard for organizations to manage those assets once they're
No
out of the
question.
building.
No question. So the point is, you need to probably increase your budget, and you're so right. Make sure your IT staffs have the resources they need, have the ability to procure the assets they need. Otherwise, the cost on the back end is a whole lot more. Brad, we appreciate you joining us today, man. That was good stuff, and look forward to having you back on again soon. Have a good day, sir.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ron.
We'll be right back here with Middays. Stay with us. We got to get